Welcome to Boring History 1. Today we're diving into one of history's most fascinating and disturbing roles, the life of an ancient Egyptian pharaoh. When you think of a pharaoh, what comes to mind? Golden masks? Towering pyramids? Mummies buried under layers of curses? You might imagine them as all-powerful gods ruling over a mighty civilization. But what if I told you their lives were full of bizarre rituals, terrifying responsibilities, and even some truly horrifying medical practices? Because behind the divine image was a reality far stranger than Hollywood will ever show you. This isn't just a history lesson, it's a deep dive into the weird, the gross, and sometimes the downright tragic lives of the rulers who built one of the greatest civilizations the world has ever known. So, what exactly is a pharaoh? The word itself means great house and originally referred to the palace or kingdom rather than the ruler. But over time, it came to mean the king, the ultimate authority in Egypt. Pharaohs weren't just kings. They were considered living gods, the earthly embodiment of Horus, son of Ra. That meant they had total control over religion, politics, and even the economy. In theory, they could do whatever they wanted. But here's the catch. With great power came great pressure, and not the kind that helps you grow stronger, more like the kind that gives you nightmares. You'd think being a god king would be amazing, right? Unlimited riches, eternal fame, and a pyramid built just for you. But the truth is, being a pharaoh was exhausting and often deeply disturbing. Every day, they had to perform religious rituals to keep the gods happy. If they failed, it was believed the Nile wouldn't flood, crops would die, and chaos would take over the land. They were expected to look perfect at all times, wearing heavy crowns, false beards made of real hair, and thick makeup that cracked in the heat. And don't even get me started on the medical side of things. We'll cover this in detail later, but let's just say many pharaohs suffered from genetic disorders, rotten teeth, and treatments that probably made them feel worse than before. Of course, no discussion of pharaohs is complete without talking about the pyramids, those massive tombs that still baffle historians today. But here's something people often forget. Pyramids weren't temples. They were tombs. Giant, expensive, death-focused monuments designed to protect the pharaoh's body and soul for eternity. That's right, long before they died, pharaohs were already preparing for the afterlife. Some spent decades building their own burial chambers, hiring thousands of workers, and filling their tombs with treasures, food, and even servants to follow them into the next world. Sounds intense, doesn't it? Now, let's talk about the darker side of being a pharaoh, because it wasn't all gold and glory. Many lived in constant fear of betrayal. Courtiers whispered behind their backs. Family members plotted against them. Some were even assassinated by their own sons or advisors. One famous example is Hatshepsut, a female pharaoh who ruled during a time when women didn't usually become kings. After her death, her stepson tried to erase her from history by removing her name from records and defacing her monuments. Others faced political instability, famine, and invasions from foreign enemies. And if they failed to maintain order, they weren't just seen as bad leaders, they were seen as failing their divine duty. Let's move on to one of the most disturbing parts of a pharaoh's life: their health. Many pharaohs suffered from genetic disorders due to generations of inbreeding. Tutankhamun, for example, had a clubfoot, scoliosis, and malaria, all traced back to his parents being siblings. Their teeth were often rotted beyond repair, thanks to a diet high in sand, covered bread, and sugary dates. And their solution? Magical spells, animal dung poultices, and bloodletting. Yes, you heard that right. If a pharaoh had a toothache, he might have been prescribed crocodile dung rubbed on his gums. Imagine going to the dentist and being handed a pile of poop instead of painkillers. Even while alive, pharaohs were preparing for death. Their entire lives revolved around ensuring they had a successful journey to the afterlife. This meant building tombs, commissioning statues, and practicing religious rites to prove their worthiness to Osiris, god of the dead. And when they finally did pass away, they went through the gruesome process of mummification, where their organs were removed, their bodies dried out, and their brains sucked out through their nose using a hook. Afterward, they were wrapped in linen, soaked in resin, placed in ornate coffins, and buried with everything they might need in the next life, including pets, furniture, and even servants. Religion played a huge role in a pharaoh's daily life, and much of it was based on superstition. They believed that every action needed to be blessed by the gods. Even simple tasks like eating, sleeping, or walking required prayers and offerings. Dream interpretation was taken very seriously. If a pharaoh dreamed of a black cat, it might be interpreted as a sign of death. If he dreamed of the sun rising, it could mean victory in battle. Priests played a major role in interpreting these signs and performing protective spells to keep evil spirits away. Let's talk about how pharaohs actually lived and how they looked. Pharaohs wore elaborate clothing made of fine linen, heavy jewelry, and large ceremonial crowns that weighed several pounds. Their makeup was thick and dramatic white to represent purity, red to mimic the eyes of Horus. Their eyebrows were painted, and they used kohl to line their eyes, both for beauty and protection against the evil eye. And then there was the false beard, a real beard made from human hair, attached with glue. It symbolized divinity, and it stayed on whether they were giving speeches, eating, or sleeping. Now, let's meet a few famous pharaohs whose lives were filled with drama, disease, and death. Tutankhamun, the boy king, died at just 19 years old. His tomb was discovered nearly intact in 1922, sparking myths of a deadly curse. Hatshepsut, one of the rare female pharaohs, built the stunning temple at Deir el-Bahri. But after her death, her stepson tried to erase her from history. Akhenaten, the so-called heretic king, tried to change Egypt's entire religion by worshipping only one god, Aten. His art style was radically different, and his appearance remains debated by scholars. Ramses II, also known as Ramses the Great, ruled for over 60 years and fathered more than 100 children. He even took his harem with him on military campaigns. If you're watching this, you probably love history, or maybe you're just curious about how people lived thousands of years ago. Either way, this video is for you. Over the next 10 hours, we'll explore every disturbing aspect of a pharaoh's life, from the bizarre daily routines to the terrifying medical practices, from the deadly politics to the gruesome mummification process. Nothing is off limits. We'll also meet more famous pharaohs, uncover their secrets, and see how their lives shaped a civilization that lasted for thousands of years. All right, now that we've set the stage, let's move on to our next section. The divine role of a pharaoh. What did it really mean to be a god on earth? We'll explore how pharaohs were worshipped, what powers they were believed to have, and why they were seen as the bridge between humans and the gods. So stay tuned, and remember, even gods can have bad days. All right, so we've covered the basics of what it meant to be a pharaoh, from daily life to the darker side of power. But now it's time to go deeper, because being a pharaoh wasn't just about ruling a kingdom. It was about being a god among mortals. That's right, pharaohs weren't just kings. They were considered divine beings, living gods who stood between humanity and the heavens. In fact, they were believed to be the earthly embodiment of Horus, the falcon-headed god of kingship and the sky. And when they died, well, that wasn't the end. They became Osiris, the god of the afterlife and rebirth. So every day, every action, every word had cosmic significance. If the pharaoh failed in his duties, the entire world could fall into chaos. So, how did this belief shape their lives? For starters, the pharaoh wasn't just a political leader, he was a religious figure, the most important priest in the land. Every morning, he had to perform rituals to honor the gods. He'd wash, dress, and offer food and incense at temples across Egypt. These weren't just symbolic gestures, they were believed to keep the universe balanced. If the Nile flooded too much or not enough, if crops failed, or if disease spread through the kingdom, it wasn't just bad luck. It was seen as a sign that the pharaoh had failed to keep the gods happy. To reinforce this divine image, everything about the pharaoh had symbolic meaning, from the clothes he wore to the way he presented himself. He wore the double crown, the shant, which represented his rule over both Upper and Lower Egypt. His false beard symbolized wisdom and divinity. Even the way he walked, slow, deliberate, almost like a bird of prey, was meant to mimic Horus. Pharaohs were often depicted in art with perfectly symmetrical faces, muscular bodies, and an expression of calm authority. This wasn't just artistic style, it was propaganda. The message was clear. The pharaoh was perfect, powerful, and eternal. But here's the problem. Being a god came with a price. First of all, you couldn't act like a normal human. You had to follow strict rules about how you dressed, how you moved, even how you ate. You couldn't show weakness. If you were sick, you still had to appear strong. If you were afraid, you still had to look fearless. And if you made a mistake, well, people didn't just see you as a flawed ruler, they saw you as failing your divine duty. This pressure led many pharaohs to take extreme measures to prove their strength. Some went to war unnecessarily. Others built massive monuments to immortalize themselves. And some even tried to change the entire religion of Egypt just to stand out. One of the most famous examples of this is Akhenaten, the so-called heretic king. Instead of worshipping the traditional gods like Amun, he declared that there was only one god, Aten, the sun disk. This was a radical break from tradition, and it caused major unrest in Egypt. Temples were closed, priests lost their power, and the capital was moved to a new city built just for Aten. Art during his reign changed dramatically too. Instead of the usual rigid, idealized images, Akhenaten was shown with a long face, wide hips, and a strangely elongated body. Scholars still debate whether this was artistic choice or a reflection of real physical traits. After his death, his name was nearly erased from history. His son Tutankhamun reversed his reforms and restored the old gods. But Akhenaten's attempt to redefine divinity shows just how deeply tied religion and power were in ancient Egypt. As we mentioned earlier, the pharaoh wasn't just a god in life, he also became a god in death. When he passed away, he was no longer Horus. He became Osiris, the god of the underworld and resurrection. This transformation was central to Egyptian beliefs about the afterlife. Just like Osiris had been killed and brought back to life, the pharaoh would rise again in the next world. Priests performed elaborate funerary rites to help him make this journey. His heart would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and balance. If it was light, he would live forever. If it was heavy with sin, he would be devoured by a monstrous beast called Amit. That's right, failure in the afterlife wasn't just about punishment, it was about complete destruction. No second chances, no reincarnation, just total annihilation. So, what does all this mean? Being a pharaoh wasn't just about ruling a kingdom, it was about carrying the weight of the entire cosmos on your shoulders. They were expected to be perfect, physically, spiritually, politically. Every action mattered, every decision carried divine consequences. In short, being a god on earth was exhausting. You might already know that ancient Egyptian pharaohs were mummified after death. But what exactly did that process involve? And why did they go to such extreme lengths to preserve their bodies? Because in ancient Egypt, death wasn't the end, it was just the beginning of another journey. One that could only be completed if the body was perfectly preserved and protected for eternity. Let's start with the big question. What is mummification? In short, it was a complex and gruesome ritual designed to stop the body from decaying. Why? Because the Egyptians believed that the soul needed a recognizable body to return to in the afterlife. So, when a pharaoh died, embalmers got to work. First, they removed all internal organs except the heart, which was believed to hold the person's soul. The brain? They didn't think it was important, so they literally scooped it out through the nose using a hook. Then came the drying process. The body was packed and covered in natron, a kind of salt mixture, and left to dry for about 40 days. After that, it was cleaned, wrapped in linen, soaked in resin, and placed inside a series of ornate coffins and sarcophagi. But wrapping the body wasn't enough. To protect the pharaoh's soul, priests placed charms, spells, and amulets inside the wrappings. Some of these items were meant to help the soul pass tests in the afterlife. Others were there to ward off evil spirits or dangerous creatures like Amit the beast that devoured unworthy souls. And then there were the treasures. Gold, jewelry, statues, food, wine, furniture, even servants and pets were sometimes buried alongside them. It was like packing for an eternal vacation, but with way more gold and fewer snacks. Now, let's take a look at some of the most famous tombs ever discovered. First, the tomb of Tutankhamun, found nearly intact in 1922. It made headlines around the world, not just because of its treasures, but because of the so-called curse of the pharaoh. According to legend, anyone who disturbed the tomb would suffer misfortune or even death. Several people connected to the excavation died under mysterious circumstances, fueling the myth. Then there's the tomb of Seti, one of the most beautifully decorated tombs in the Valley of the Kings. Its walls are covered in stunning hieroglyphics, showing the journey through the underworld. And of course, the Great Pyramids, massive monuments built as tombs for early pharaohs. These weren't temples, they were burial chambers filled with everything a god-king might need in the next life. Now, let's talk about curses, one of the most famous parts of pharaoh burials. Many tombs included inscriptions warning that anyone who disturbed the dead would face divine punishment. These weren't just symbolic. People truly believed them. But real danger didn't come from ghosts or magic. It came from tomb robbers. As soon as a pharaoh was buried, thieves started hunting for his treasure. Some graves were robbed within weeks of burial. That's why later tombs were hidden in secret locations like those in the Valley of the Kings. Despite all the effort, most royal tombs were looted long before modern archaeologists ever found them. Only a few, like Tutankhamun's, survived relatively untouched. So, what have we learned? Being a pharaoh didn't end with death, it just entered a new phase. One where your body had to survive thousands of years, your soul had to pass impossible trials, and your tomb had to withstand greedy hands. It's no wonder they went to such extremes to protect themselves even in death. Coming up next, we'll explore one of the darkest parts of pharaoh life, health problems and medieval medicine. We'll see how pharaohs dealt with disease, decay, and treatments that often made things worse. From rotten teeth to crocodile dung remedies, you won't believe what they went through just to feel better. You probably picture them lounging on golden thrones or commanding armies from chariots. But the truth is, being a pharaoh was more like being the CEO of an entire civilization with divine makeup glued to your face. From morning rituals to elaborate costumes, pharaohs lived under constant pressure to look perfect, act powerful, and perform sacred duties whether they wanted to or not. Every morning, the pharaoh's day started before sunrise, not with coffee or toast, but with a team of priests, servants, and makeup artists ready to transform him into a living god. First came the cleansing ritual. He was washed with water from the Nile, considered sacred and purifying. Then he was dressed in fine linen robes, usually white, to symbolize purity. Next came the heavy crown and ceremonial jewelry. Some crowns weighed several pounds and had to be supported by hidden straps. Imagine wearing a full helmet every day while ruling a kingdom. Then came the makeup, thick, dramatic, and symbolic. Pharaohs used kohl to line their eyes not just for beauty, but to protect against the evil eye. They painted their eyebrows black and added red pigment around their eyes to mimic the look of Horus, the falcon-headed god of kingship. Their faces were painted with white pigment to represent purity, and sometimes even gold dust was applied for extra shine. And yes, all of this stayed on whether they were giving speeches, eating, or sleeping. And then there was the false beard, one of the most iconic symbols of pharaonic divinity. Contrary to what you might think, it wasn't fake plastic or wood. It was made from real human hair, shaped into a long braid and glued directly onto the chin. Even though many pharaohs could grow their own beards, they still wore these artificial ones to show their divine status. And no, they didn't take them off, not even at night. Imagine trying to eat a meal or kiss someone with a giant fake beard glued to your face. That was daily life as a pharaoh. Beyond makeup and beards, a pharaoh's clothing was also loaded with symbolism. They wore long linen robes, often embroidered with sacred animals and gods. Gold jewelry rings, bracelets, necklaces was worn not for luxury, but for protection and power. The double crown called the pshent represented rule over both Upper and Lower Egypt. Wearing it correctly was a political statement, not just fashion. And during religious ceremonies, they wore special cloaks and carried staffs that symbolized their role as both king and priest. But it wasn't all about looks. Pharaohs had real responsibilities, and they had to do them every single day. Each morning, they performed religious rituals to honor the gods. If they skipped them, it was believed the Nile wouldn't flood, crops would die, and chaos would descend upon Egypt. They met with advisors, signed decrees, and oversaw construction projects. And if they showed any sign of weakness, illness, fatigue, or even sadness, it was seen as a failure of their divine duty. Living in the palace meant living under constant scrutiny. Servants followed them everywhere. Priests watched their behavior. Advisors whispered behind their backs. Even their meals were prepared in front of them to prove they weren't poisoned. And forget privacy. Everything a pharaoh did was documented. Their actions were carved into stone, written on scrolls, and passed down through history. So, next time you picture a pharaoh, don't just think of gold masks and pyramids. Think of early mornings, heavy crowns, glued-on beards, and makeup that never came off. Being a god, king wasn't easy. It was exhausting, uncomfortable, and filled with pressure. But to the ancient Egyptians, it was necessary because the fate of the world rested on their shoulders. Coming up next, we'll explore one of the most disturbing parts of pharaoh life, health problems and medieval medicine. We'll uncover how pharaohs dealt with disease, decay, and treatments that often made things worse, including remedies made from crocodile dung, honey, and bloodletting. So stay tuned, because things are about to get really gross. Pharaohs also dealt with diseases like malaria, tuberculosis, and schistosomiasis, a parasitic infection spread through contaminated water. Without antibiotics, infections could easily become fatal. Even a small cut could lead to gangrene. And when it came to pain relief, well, they didn't have ibuprofen or anesthesia. Instead, they relied on wine, beer, and opium-laced balms, which at least gave them something to look forward to after a long day of wearing glued-on beards and heavy crowns. Despite all these horrors, Egyptian medicine wasn't entirely useless. They had some surprisingly advanced knowledge of anatomy and herbal remedies. There were special healing temples where priests acted as doctors. Patients would sleep inside the temple overnight and receive dreams they believed were messages from the gods. If they dreamed of a snake, it meant healing was coming. If they dreamed of death, well, better luck next life. These priests kept medical scrolls detailing symptoms, diagnoses, and treatments, some of which are still studied today. So, what have we learned? Being a pharaoh didn't protect you from disease, decay, or painful treatments. In fact, it might have made things worse, especially if your doctor thought applying crocodile dung was the best option. Next time you feel bad about visiting the dentist or taking medicine, remember, at least you're not getting treated by an ancient Egyptian priest who thinks donkey brains will fix your headache. Coming up next, we'll explore one of the darkest parts of pharaoh life: political intrigue, betrayal, and assassination. We'll uncover how courtiers plotted behind their backs, family members turned against them, and how some pharaohs were murdered by their own sons. Before we go, here are a few bonus facts about pharaoh health. Some mummies show signs of heart disease, possibly due to overeating rich foods. Evidence suggests Ramses II suffered from arthritis so badly he needed a walking cane in his final years. Tutankhamun likely died from complications of a broken leg after falling off a chariot. Many pharaohs lost their hair early, so they wore wigs made of real human hair. You might imagine them as all-powerful rulers who never had to worry about anything, but the truth is, many pharaohs lived in constant fear. Courtiers whispered behind their backs. Family members plotted against them, and some were even assassinated by their own sons or advisors. So grab your pillow, turn down the lights, and let's explore how power, politics, and paranoia ruled from the throne. Being a pharaoh meant living under constant surveillance, not just from priests or scribes, but from your own court. Your advisors, generals, and even your closest relatives were always watching, waiting for a moment of weakness. A single misstep, a failed harvest, a military loss, or even a minor illness could make you look weak. And weakness in a god-king, that was an invitation to take over. Many pharaohs surrounded themselves with spies just to keep up with who was plotting what. One of the most famous examples of royal betrayal comes from Hatshepsut, one of Egypt's few female pharaohs. She rose to power after her husband died, and her stepson, Thutmose III, was too young to rule. She acted as regent at first, then declared herself pharaoh, shocking everyone. After her death, Thutmose III tried to erase her from history. He removed her name from records, defaced her monuments, and even tried to pretend she never existed. Talk about family drama. Some pharaohs didn't just lose power, they lost their lives. Ramses III, one of Egypt's last great rulers, was the victim of a conspiracy led by his own harem and second wife. The plot was recorded on papyrus scrolls found in Deir el-Medina. It detailed how Queen Tiye and a group of conspirators planned to kill Ramses and place her son on the throne. The plot mostly failed, but Ramses still died shortly after under mysterious circumstances. His mummy shows signs of a throat injury, suggesting he may have been strangled. While not exactly a murder, there's another fascinating example of political manipulation involving statues. Statues of Amenhotep III were placed in temples across Egypt. Over time, people began believing that these statues spoke to worshippers at dawn, giving divine advice. When his successor, Akhenaten, changed the religion of Egypt and moved the capital, the speaking statues mysteriously stopped talking. Was it a coincidence? Or did someone sabotage them to undermine Akhenaten's rule? To protect themselves, pharaohs took extreme precautions. They rarely appeared in public without full ceremonial dress and guards. Their food was tested before they ate it sometimes by servants tasting it first. And some pharaohs kept personal bodyguards made up of foreign mercenaries, men loyal only to them, not to Egyptian nobles. But despite all these measures, many still ended up dead, often by those closest to them. Ramses III wasn't the only one to meet a violent end. We know of several other rulers who likely died violently, though the details are less clear. Sobekneferu, one of the earliest female rulers, disappeared from records after a short reign, possibly deposed or killed. Siptah, a teenage pharaoh, was probably assassinated by his own officials. And some believe that even Tutankhamun may have died from a blow to the head, though this remains debated by historians. So next time you picture a pharaoh, don't just think of golden masks and pyramids. Think of paranoia, secret plots, and the constant fear of betrayal. Because being a god king came with a price, and sometimes that price was your life. Coming up next, we'll explore one of the most fascinating and terrifying parts of pharaoh life: religion, magic, and superstition. We'll see how every action needed to be blessed by the gods, why dreams were taken seriously, and how priests used spells to protect the ruler from evil spirits. So stay tuned, because things are about to get even more mystical. You might imagine ancient Egyptian rulers as wise leaders or powerful warriors, but the truth is they lived under constant divine pressure. Every action needed to be blessed by the gods. Every dream was taken seriously, and every bad omen could mean disaster. So grab your pillow, turn down the lights, and let's explore how magic and belief ruled from the throne. For a pharaoh, religion wasn't just something you practiced on holy days. It was part of everyday life. They were believed to be living gods, the earthly embodiment of Horus, and after death, they became Osiris. That meant everything they did had cosmic consequences. Priests surrounded them constantly, performing blessings, reciting prayers, and making offerings to keep the gods happy. If the Nile didn't flood, if crops failed, or if disease spread through the kingdom, it wasn't seen as bad luck. It was seen as the pharaoh failing his divine duty. Each morning, the pharaoh performed religious rituals to honor the gods whether he wanted to or not. He washed with sacred water, dressed in ceremonial robes, and offered food and incense at temples across Egypt. These weren't just symbolic gestures, they were believed to keep the universe balanced. Temples were massive centers of power, filled with priests who interpreted signs, conducted ceremonies, and even acted as doctors using spells and charms. Dreams weren't just random thoughts during sleep, they were messages from the gods. If a pharaoh dreamed of a black cat, it might be interpreted as a sign of death. If he dreamed of the sun rising, it could mean victory in battle. Dream interpretation was taken very seriously, and some dreams were recorded on papyrus scrolls to be studied by priests. There was even a special book called the Ramesside Dream Book, which listed hundreds of dreams and what they meant, good or bad. The gods didn't just speak through dreams, they sent signs in the real world too. A sudden storm, a warning, a bird flying left instead of right, a bad omen. Even the way an animal moved could be interpreted as a message from the heavens. Before going to war or making important decisions, pharaohs would consult priests to read these signs. And if the omens were bad, they might delay major plans for weeks or even cancel them altogether. To protect themselves, pharaohs relied heavily on magic both in life and in death. Amulets were placed inside mummy wrappings to help the soul pass tests in the afterlife. Some were carved with the Eye of Horus for protection. Others contained spells from the Book of the Dead. Priests also performed rituals to ward off evil spirits, curses, and dangerous creatures like Ammit the beast that devoured unworthy souls. Even minor illnesses were treated with spells and chants, believing that words had real power when spoken correctly. Animals played a huge role in Egyptian religion, and many were considered sacred. Cats were protected by law. Killing one, even accidentally, could result in execution. Crocodiles were worshipped in some regions, and ibises were so sacred that millions were mummified and buried in tombs. Pharaohs often associated themselves with animals wearing crowns shaped like falcons, lions, or snakes to show strength and divine favor. So next time you think of a pharaoh, don't just picture golden masks and pyramids. Think of priests whispering spells, dreams being analyzed, and every little event being seen as a message from the gods. Because in ancient Egypt, power didn't just come from armies or gold. It came from faith, fear, and the unseen forces of the supernatural. Coming up next, we'll explore one of the most dramatic parts of pharaoh life: famous rulers and their disturbing lives. We'll meet Tutankhamun, Hatshepsut, Akhenaten, and Ramses II and uncover the secrets behind their short lives, strange reigns, and tragic ends. We've covered their daily lives, their health problems, their superstitions, and their political struggles. Now, let's meet the people behind the myths and uncover the truth about how these rulers really lived and died. Let's start with one of the most well-known pharaohs, Tutankhamun, the boy king, whose tomb was discovered nearly intact in 1922. But before he became a legend, but was just a sickly teenager who inherited a kingdom in chaos. Born around 1341 BCE, he likely suffered from malaria, a deformed foot, and a weakened immune system, all due to generations of inbreeding. He died at just 19 years old, possibly from complications of a broken leg after falling off his chariot. His burial was rushed, and his tomb was smaller than usual, suggesting he died unexpectedly. The so-called curse of the pharaoh only added to the mystery when several people connected to the tomb's discovery died shortly afterward. Now, let's talk about Hatshepsut, one of the few women to rule Egypt as pharaoh. She came to power after her husband died, and her stepson Thutmose III was too young to rule. At first, she acted as regent, but eventually she declared herself pharaoh, complete with false beard, kingly titles, and full divine authority. Her reign was peaceful and prosperous, but after her death, Thutmose III tried to erase her from history. He removed her name from records, defaced her monuments, and even tried to pretend she never existed. Why? Because having a female ruler challenged traditional ideas of kingship, and Thutmose wanted to restore the old ways. Next up, Akhenaten, often called the heretic king. Instead of worshipping the traditional gods like Amun, Akhenaten declared there was only one god, Aten, the sun disk. He moved the capital to a brand new city built just for Aten, closed temples, and gave priests the ultimate cold shoulder. Art during his reign changed dramatically. Instead of rigid, idealized images, Akhenaten was shown with a long face, wide hips, and strangely elongated limbs. Scholars still debate whether this was artistic choice or a reflection of real physical traits. After his death, his son Tutankhamun reversed his reforms and restored the old gods. Akhenaten's name was nearly erased from history. Now, let's meet Ramses II, also known as Ramses the Great. He ruled for over 60 years and fathered more than 100 children. He built massive temples, statues, and monuments to immortalize himself. One of his most famous works was Abu Simbel, a temple carved directly into a mountain. Even today, its statues are so large that nothing else comes close. Despite all his achievements, Ramses wasn't immune to age or disease. By the time he died at around 90, he was bald, toothless, and suffering from arthritis so bad he needed a cane. Even in death he had drama. His mummy was moved multiple times to avoid tomb robbers, and today he holds the unique distinction of having an official passport and being reburied as a national hero. Of course, Tut, Hatshepsut, Akhenaten, and Ramses weren't the only interesting rulers. There was Seti I, Ramses II's father, who built one of the most beautiful tombs ever found in the Valley of the Kings. Then there was Sneferu, the builder of pyramids, who created the world's first true pyramid and paved the way for the Great Pyramid of Giza. And don't forget Amenhotep, better known as Akhenaten, who started a religious revolution that shook Egypt to its core. Each of these rulers left their mark, whether through art, architecture, or sheer drama. So what have we learned from this 10-hour journey? That being a pharaoh wasn't all gold and glory. It was exhausting, uncomfortable, and filled with pressure. They were expected to be perfect physically, spiritually, politically. Every action mattered. Every decision carried divine consequences. They lived under constant surveillance. They wore heavy crowns, glued-on beards, and thick makeup every single day. They dealt with rotten teeth, genetic disorders, and treatments that often made things worse, like crocodile dung poultices and bloodletting. They were buried in elaborate tombs, surrounded by treasures, spells, and sometimes even servants. And many lived in fear of betrayal, assassination, curses, and the gods themselves. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the disturbing lives of pharaohs. Over the past 10 hours, we've explored everything from daily rituals to bizarre medical practices, from court intrigue to magical beliefs, and finally, the real lives of the rulers who shaped one of the greatest civilizations in history. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to relax, rewind, or fall asleep while learning. And if you want more content like this, don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, sweet dreams, and may the gods watch over you.